Alexander the Great, the man who conquered the world by 30. Picture this. A 20-year-old becomes king after his father's assassination. Within 13 years, he conquers most of the known world, never loses a battle, and dies in Babylon at 32, under mysterious circumstances that historians still debate today. This isn't fiction, this is Alexander III of Macedon, the man we call the Great. But here's what they do and tell you in textbooks. Alexander slept with a copy of Homer's Iliad under his pillow, believed he was descended from both Achilles and Hercules, and once cut the Gordian knot with his sword, when told that whoever untied it would rule Asia. He was equal parts brilliant strategist, reckless warrior, and theatrical showman who understood that conquering hearts and minds mattered as much as conquering cities. The apprentice who outshone his master Alexander's education reads like assembling the ultimate superhero origin story. His tutor, Aristotle, arguably the greatest mind of the ancient world. From ages 13 to 16, Alexander studied philosophy, medicine, literature, and science in the idyllic gardens of Mysa. But while Aristotle taught him to think, his father Philip II taught him to fight, and Philip had transformed Macedonia from a backwater kingdom into a military juggernaut. Here's where it gets interesting. Alexander was barely 80 when he commanded the cavalry at the Battle of Paranoia, the clash that made Macedonia master of Greece. His charge against the elite, Theban's sacred Bandan army of 150 pairs of male lovers who fought to the death rather than retreat, was so devastating that Philip reportedly wept with joy, crying, "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedonia is too small for you." 2 years later, Philip was dead, stabbed by his own bodyguard at his daughter's wedding. Conspiracy theories swirled immediately. Was it personal revenge? A Persian plot? Or something darker? Had Alexander and his mother, Olympias, orchestrated the assassination? The truth died with the conspirators, all of whom were conveniently killed before they could talk. At 20, Alexander inherited not just a throne, but also a powder keg of enemies, rivals, and doubters. The gambler king. Within months, Alexander did something that reveals his psychological warfare genius. When Thebes rebelled, he didn't just defeat them, said them. The entire city was razed to the ground, its population sold into slavery. With only one exception, the house of the poet Pindar was left standing. Temesar. Respect culture, respect me, or face total annihilation. The rest of Greece fell silent, but Alexander's real genius wasn't destruction, it was his impossible audacity. In 334 BCE, he crossed into Asia Minor with just 37,000 men to face the Persian Empire, which commanded armies in the hundreds of thousands. Military experts gave him no chance. His treasury was nearly empty. His supply lines would be impossibly stretched. He should have failed. Instead, he won his first major battle at Granicus River by doing the unthinkable, personally leading the cavalry charge and nearly dying in the process. A Persian nobleman's sword shattered Alexander's helmet, and only the quick action of his general Cletus saved his life. This became Alexander's signature move, leading from the front, sharing every danger, earning fanatical loyalty from soldiers who would follow him literally to the ends of the earth. The legend builder. Here's what made Alexander different from every conqueror before him. He understood mythology and marketing. At Gordium, when priests showed him the impossibly tangled Gordian knot and explained the prophecy, Alexander didn't waste time trying to untie it. He drew his sword and sliced it in half. Prophecy fulfilled. Was it cheating? Who cares when you're writing history? At the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, Alexander faced Persian king Darius III and his massive army. The Persians outnumbered the Macedonians at least 2. Alexander spotted Darius on the battlefield and charged straight at him with his companion cavalry. Darius panicked and fled, abandoning his army, his family, and his dignity. That single moment of audacity broke Persian morale and became the stuff of legend. But Alexander didn't just defeat the Persians, he absorbed them. When he captured Darius's family, he treated them with such respect that Darius's mother, Sisygambis, later chose to stay with Alexander rather than return to her own son. This wasn't just chivalry. It was strategic genius. Alexander was building a narrative where he wasn't a conqueror, but a liberator, not a destroyer of Persian civilization, but its rightful heir. The siege that shouldn't have worked. In 332 BCE, Alexander arrived at the island city of Tyre, one of the ancient world's greatest maritime powers. They refused to surrender, confident in their fortifications. Tyre sat on an island half a mile from shore, protected by massive walls and supplied by sea. It was considered impregnable. Alexander's solution: build a causeway. For 7 months, his engineers constructed a land bridge from the shore to the island, under constant attack from Tyrian ships and archers. Military historians still study this siege as a masterclass in engineering, persistence, and tactical innovation. When Tyre finally fell, the causeway remained, and it's still there today, having transformed Tyre from an island into a peninsula. Alexander literally reshaped geography. Into the unknown Egypt welcomed Alexander as a liberator from Persian rule and crowned him pharaoh. But Alexander wasn't content with titles. He made a pilgrimage across the desert to the Oracle of Siwa, where the priests proclaimed him the son of Zeus. Whether Alexander believed this divine heritage or simply recognized its political value, he never clarified. But from that moment, he styled himself as more than a king. He was a god walking among mortals. Then came the impossible: conquering Persia itself. In 331 BCE, at Darius assembled perhaps 250,000 troops and prepared the battlefield itself, flattening the ground for his scythed chariots. Alexander had maybe 47,000 men. On paper, it was suicide. Alexander's solution showcased his tactical brilliance. He positioned his forces at an angle, forcing Darius to extend his line. When the Persian line stretched thin, Alexander spotted a gap, formed his cavalry into a wedge, and charged straight through toward Darius himself. Once again, Darius fled. The battle became a rout. The Persian Empire effectively ended that day, though Darius would spend another year running before being murdered by his own satraps. The descent: here's where the story darkens. As Alexander pushed deeper into Asia, something changed. The young king, who studied philosophy and honored poets, became increasingly paranoid and erratic. In 328 BCE, drunk at a banquet, Alexander personally killed Cletus, a man who had saved his life at Granicus River. An argument about whether Alexander was becoming too Persian in his ways. He forced his Macedonian nobles to perform proskynesis, the Persian custom of prostrating before the king, something Greeks considered shameful. He insisted on being worshipped as divine. He married the Bactrian princess Roxana, then later married 2 Persian princesses in a mass wedding, where he forced 10,000 of his soldiers to marry Persian women. Was this visionary multiculturalism or megalomania? Historians still debate. The army finally refused to go further at the Hyphasis River in India in 326 BCE. They had marched for 8 years and 11,000 miles. They'd crossed deserts, mountains, and rivers. They'd fought elephants and armies in dozens of battles. Tyre. For the first and only time, Alexander had to retreat, though he called it consolidating his gains. The Mystery of Babylon. On June 10, 323 BCE, in Babylon, Alexander died. He was 32 years old. The official story says fever, possibly malaria or typhoid. But his symptoms, progressive paralysis, while remaining mentally clear, have fueled speculation for millennia. Was it Posan, West Nile virus, pancreatitis from alcoholism? We may never know. His last words, when asked who should inherit his empire, were allegedly to the strongest, or possibly to Creatorus, depending on the source. Either way, it sparked decades of brutal civil wars among his generals that ultimately divided his empire into the Hellenistic kingdoms that would dominate the Mediterranean world until Rome's rise, the legacy that shaped the world. Alexander never lost a battle in his life. He founded over 20 cities, most named Alexandria. He spread Greek culture, language, and ideas from the Mediterranean to India, creating a Hellenistic fusion that influenced art, science, philosophy, and religion for centuries. The Greeks he left behind in Bactria would establish kingdoms that lasted for generations. His conquests opened trade routes and cultural exchanges that connected East and West in unprecedented ways. But perhaps his greatest trick was creating a legend that outlived the reality. Was he a visionary, uniting the world under Hellenistic civilization, or a brilliant but reckless conqueror whose empire collapsed the moment he died because it was built entirely on his personality? Was he liberating the East from Persian tyranny, or simply replacing one empire with another? The man who conquered the known world by 30 and died at 32 left behind more questions than answers. But he also left behind a simple, undeniable truth. For a brief, impossible moment, one man came closer than anyone in history to uniting the ancient world, not through divine right or inherited power, but through sheer audacity, tactical genius, and the kind of ambition that refused to recognize the word impossible. Alexander didn't just change history. He did it with such dramatic flair that we're still talking about him 2,300 years later. And honestly, that's exactly how he would have wanted it.